Imagine the scene: a calm lake in Louisiana, fishermen casting their rods, families relaxing on the shore. An ordinary morning on November 20th, 1980. And 3 hours later, nothing at all was left of this lake. Just an empty hole in the ground, more than 400 meters deep. An entire lake the size of 1,500 football fields disappeared as if it had never been there at all. But the craziest part was that this was only the beginning of the story. How can an entire lake vanish? What force is strong enough to swallow billions of liters of water in just a few hours, together with drilling rigs, barges, and even huge pieces of land? And what could be even more unbelievable after that? Lake Peigneur in Louisiana was not anything special. A shallow freshwater lake only as deep as a two-story house, with an area about the size of New York's Central Park. Locals came here to fish for perch. Families loved to have picnics. On a small island in the center of the lake, there was a beautiful botanical garden. Nothing extraordinary, just a normal piece of nature in the south of the United States. But under this calm lake, there was a whole hidden underground world. Deep in the earth, at a depth equal to the height of the Empire State Building, there was a huge salt mine owned by the Diamond Crystal Salt Company, which produced about 100,000 tons of salt a year. Imagine a giant underground city made of tunnels and chambers as tall as a 9-story building, carved out of the purest white salt. This salt had formed millions of years ago when ancient seas evaporated, leaving behind thick layers of salt crystals. But the riches under the lake attracted not only salt miners. Now the oil company Texaco entered the game. They knew that oil often gathered near salt domes and decided to drill an exploratory well right in the lake. Texaco received a government license for this and hired the contractor Wilson Brothers to install a floating drilling platform. On the morning of November 20th, the drilling crew worked as usual. At a depth equal to the height of the Burj Khalifa Tower, their 14-inch drill bit suddenly got stuck. In principle, nothing terrible. This happens all the time. They tried to free the drill, used the standard procedures, turned it, added pressure, tried to shake it loose. But then something strange began. The workers heard a series of loud pops from below, as if someone was setting off firecrackers in a basement, and the drilling platform started to tilt. The experienced oilmen instantly understood. Something was going catastrophically wrong. The crew of 12 people immediately evacuated to shore, and only that saved their lives. And then the impossible happened. The drilling rig, which should have been standing in just 3 meters of water, suddenly began to sink. In only a few minutes, it completely disappeared under the water, even though it was taller than the lake was deep. At the spot where the rig had just stood, a whirlpool began to form. At first small, like the funnel in a bathtub, but it grew at a frightening speed, gaining incredible power. And then everyone understood the awful truth. The drillers had accidentally punctured the roof of the salt mine under the lake. What was happening under the water at that moment? Imagine water rushing into a hole the size of a manhole cover in the roof of the salt mine. The salt began to dissolve instantly in the water, faster than sugar in boiling water. The hole grew, the roof collapsed. This created the effect of a giant plug being pulled out of a bathtub the size of an entire city. All the water of the lake instantly rushed down into the underground tunnels. And then a catastrophic chain reaction began. The more water flowed into the mine, the faster the salt dissolved, the bigger the hole became. And a bigger hole let in even more water, which dissolved even more salt. It became a closed circle of destruction. The disaster sped itself up with incredible speed. In 3 hours, a giant whirlpool, nearly a mile wide, formed, pulling everything inside with the power of a hurricane. Into this hellish funnel went 11 barges loaded with equipment, each the size of a small ship, as well as a tugboat, docks, and another drilling rig. But the most terrifying thing, the whirlpool began to consume the land. 65 acres of ground, an area equal to 50 football fields, including part of Jefferson Island with its botanical garden, simply collapsed into the enormous hole. Large century-old trees fell, their roots sticking out, and seconds later disappeared into the abyss forever. A local fisherman who was on the lake at that fatal moment later said that he felt his boat being pulled toward the center by an invisible force. Only by turning on the motor at full power and praying to all the saints did he somehow manage to escape from the deadly trap. And what was happening inside the salt mine at that time? 55 miners were working deep underground when master electrician Junius Gaddison noticed a thin stream of murky water on the floor of the storage room. The experienced miner instantly understood. This was a disaster. He immediately switched on the evacuation signal and shouted into the phone to the hoist operator, "Lower the cage, now!" Imagine the horror. Water rising every second. Salt pillars as thick as a bus that held up the roof melting before their eyes. Tunnels as tall as a cathedral beginning to collapse. The 55 men had only one elevator and just a few minutes before complete flooding. The water was already waist deep when the last group of miners squeezed into the hoist cage. But thanks to strict discipline and evacuation drills practiced to perfection, all 55 men reached the surface alive. It was a true miracle. Not a single person was lost. Meanwhile, above ground, a real apocalypse was taking place. While the lake was rapidly vanishing into the whirlpool, compressed air from the flooded tunnels burst to the surface in a geyser as tall as a 40-story skyscraper. The roar could be heard for dozens of miles. Windows shook in homes, and people thought an earthquake had started. And then finally, everything went silent. In just 3 hours, nothing remained of the entire lake, only a giant dry crater. For several hours at the site of the lake, there gaped a huge pit hundreds of meters deep. The bottom was covered only with wet silt, pieces of barges, and twisted metal. In the air hung a strange smell, a mix of salt, silt, and machine oil. There was an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional sobbing sounds of the ground settling. It seemed as if nature had taken a deep breath and froze, waiting. But this calm was deceptive. Then something completely unbelievable happened, as if nature itself decided to correct human mistakes. The Del Carmen Canal, which for 200 years had quietly carried fresh water out of the lake into the Gulf of Mexico, suddenly reversed its flow. Imagine, instead of flowing to the sea, the water turned and rushed back. Salt water from the sea, as massive as 1,000 trains, poured backward through the canal, heading into the giant hole where the lake had been. The suction was so powerful that the sea was literally being pulled into the crater. In the middle of the former lake, a roaring waterfall as high as a 15-story building appeared, the highest in Louisiana's history. For 2 days straight, this insane process continued without stopping. Billions of gallons of salt water rushed backward, foaming and roaring, slowly filling the sinkhole. The ground shook from the thunder, and people could not believe their eyes. They were watching the sea flow in the opposite direction. It seemed as if the planet itself had gone mad. When the chaos finally ended, a completely different lake appeared on the map. Instead of a shallow freshwater pond as deep as a person's height, there was now a saltwater lake as deep as a 20-story building. The deepest in Louisiana. The ecosystem was completely erased from the earth. All freshwater fish were dead, the plants disappeared, even the shores changed forever. To this day, a lonely brick chimney sticks up from the water. All that is left of a house that collapsed into the crater, with its owners barely escaping at the last moment of the disaster. A chilling reminder of the day when the earth opened and swallowed an entire world. An investigation began, but what could really be investigated? All the evidence had gone to the bottom together with the lake. The official 1981 report confirmed the mechanism of the disaster, but never identified a specific culprit. There were two versions. Either the drillers had miscalculated their coordinates by several dozen meters, or the salt company's maps of the mine were inaccurate. Texaco and the contractors paid $32 million to the owners of the mine and almost $13 million more to the Botanical Garden. At that time, the fortune of a small country. The mine was closed forever in 1986, burying underwater decades of work and millions of tons of equipment. But how could such a disaster even happen? After all, both the oilmen and the miners were professionals. Each company had maps, plans, and calculations. Texaco knew about the existence of the mine, and Diamond Crystal knew about the drilling plans. Somewhere in this chain, a fatal mistake of just a few dozen meters occurred. Then the laws of physics and chemistry took over. Salt is not granite or concrete. It is a soft, soluble mineral that melts in water faster than sugar in hot tea. Salt mines seem strong and stable, but only as long as they remain completely dry. Once water finds even the smallest crack, a runaway process of self-destruction begins. The 14-inch hole in the roof of the mine became a deadly breach. Water dissolved the salt around the hole. The opening grew to the size of a car, then to the size of a house, then to the size of a stadium. Huge underground chambers collapsed one after another like a house of cards. Each collapse widened a crater at the bottom of the lake until the entire mine turned into one gigantic hole. Let's try to grasp the insane scale of what happened. In 3 hours, a lake larger than half of Manhattan vanished. Billions of gallons of water disappeared into the underground voids at the speed of 10 Niagara Falls combined. At the same time, the largest man-made sinkhole in the world was created. And all of this happened because of one small drilling error of just a few meters. Local resident Michael Richard filmed the disaster with his home camera, his hands shaking. He later said, "I don't know if this has ever happened before, but we witnessed the creation of the largest man-made crater in the world. It was like the end of the world in one single place." People described that at first they didn't understand what was happening. The lake seemed to be draining into an invisible pipe. The water spun faster and faster, mercilessly dragging boats, barges, and huge chunks of land into its deadly vortex. The sound was deafening, the roar of millions of tons of water plunging into the abyss, mixed with the crack of breaking metal and the groaning of collapsing earth. And here is the surprising detail. A few days after the disaster, 9 out of the 11 sunken barges floated back to the surface on their own, like corks from a champagne bottle. When the water pressure equalized, the giant steel boxes shot upward, reminding everyone that the laws of physics still applied even in this madness. In this monstrous catastrophe, only 3 dogs were lost. No human lives were taken, which was nothing short of a miracle. Today, Lake Peigneur is relatively calm again, but it is already a completely different lake. Instead of a shallow, freshwater pond with perch and pike, it is now a saltwater lake as deep as a 20-story building. The old ecosystem has vanished forever. Marine fish took the place of freshwater species. Even the algae and plankton completely changed. Since 1994, the underground cavities beneath the lake have been used for storing natural gas. But locals still get nervous every time they see bubbles rising on the surface. In 2014, they even blocked plans to expand the gas storage facilities. The memory of that fatal day was still too fresh. The Lake Peigneur disaster forever changed safety standards in the oil and mining industries worldwide. Now, before every drilling project, the underground structures are scanned in detail, like an X-ray of the Earth. But the main lesson remains the same. Nature can turn against us at any moment, and one small mistake can erase entire landscapes from the map. On November 20th, 1980, the world witnessed how in just 3 hours a whole lake could disappear completely, how the earth could open up and swallow everything alive, how water could flow backward and create waterfalls where they had never existed, and realized that one small human error can easily erase from the planet an area the size of an entire city.